Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. Man, we have got a great show for you tonight, and we got all three of us here tonight, so we're going to be triple trouble tonight. Uh, but no, seriously, I was talking with Karen about this. I don't know if it was it this morning or yesterday morning about our subject, and you said, "Oh, that group of birds that never gets talked about."
Yep.
But you know, we really hope you have been following our advice for raising, or for not raising, but starting baby chicks. But have you ever wondered about really what should come next? Well, we're going to give you our thoughts about that tonight, and we're going to help you keep your birds moving forward. That's what the title of our show is. Keep moving forward, and we want you to keep your birds moving forward. Just said something about Florida, and I got Florida on the brain. Uh,
Cut it out. Cut it out.
few seconds, we're going to get right into it. We're going to do tonight, we're going to take it in a couple of different sections. First, we're going to talk about some management, and then we're going to get into uh, nutritional aspects. But and some of these are going to be common sense if you just stop and think about it. For example, the first one on my list is you're going to need to increase and start increasing the amount of space per bird in your pen. Uh, some birds grow faster than others. Some grow slower, and I shouldn't say birds, but breeds. Um, Leopards and Minorcas, they grow relatively fast. Dual-purpose breeds like Reds and New Hampshires, they're kind of that middle of the road type thing. And you get into those big Asiatic breeds, the Brahmas and the Cochins, and even the Jersey Giants, they can seem like take forever to mature. Those birds take 18 to 24 months to reach full maturity. So you just have to keep it in mind and plan ahead for that. And the reason you want to do that is, first off, it reduces stress from fighting, from feather picking, from pecking problems, from having feed hogs in your group. Um, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on. Uh, I have always seen in my experience that crowded birds really struggle to reach their genetic potential. Um, you can stunt a chicken fairly fast. Have you seen that to be true, Jeff?
Yeah, you can. And it's interesting you started out with like space requirement. There were some new regulations that came down. I work closely with the organic community,
Mm-hmm.
certified organic folks, and they just published some new regulations, and they're looking at 3 pounds per square foot, right? So if you know the size of your coop or your pen, they're saying adequate living conditions are 3 pounds per square foot. Now, and that's kind of in a fixed structure coop, building type where you're not moving them every day. You're not, not a lot of range space or something like that. I always felt 4 pounds per square foot was a good number, if you're moving that space along. But, I don't, it's just like us, right? How many people can you get in an elevator? You got to have enough living space for them to act naturally, right? And
Yep.
be a chicken. So either one, 3 to 4 pounds per square foot is kind of a good guidance.
And,
And, people ought to know what their birds weigh, right?
and you brought up a good point. It depends on your situation. And I'm in a situation here where I can't range my birds. I couldn't use a tractor now if my life depended on it to move a tractor around and about. But I sort of settled on, for my big reds, about 10 square feet per bird. And that keeps everybody calm, cool, collected,
Yeah, that's great space.
pretty much squabble free. And just my personal thoughts are that exhibition birds need more space or do better with more space than they do in close confinement. It prevents a lot of feather damage. that we see.
100%. I agree 100%.
Um, and if you haven't, while we're on space, if you haven't done this already, when your bird's starting hitting 12 weeks, that's about the time um, where you really want to start separating the sexes. Because if you don't, you're going to have problems later on down the road. You'll have young males hogging the feed and driving off the females, and um, it's just not um, a good situation. I see Sue Dobson says my big birds love to roam the yard. Mine do too, but every time I go out there, they see me coming, and I guess they're afraid I'm going to shut them up, and they head for the palmetto bushes out there I planted in the yard, and they get up under that because they know I can't get in there after them. But along with more space per bird, something else you need to be really aware of is as your birds grow and as your birds mature, you're going to have more feeder space and more waterer space. Or if you're using nipples or watering cups, you're going to have to add more of those because, particularly with summer coming up now, uh, if you fall behind on that water, you're you're just asking for trouble. Make sure that you have the adequate number of drinkers or square linear feet of drinking the salt. And here again, this is another one that deals with space. As your birds grow and mature, you're going to need more roost space. There's a good chance. Um, I know Jeff is, and I am too, a fan of the roosting platforms and not the ladder style uh, roost. It seems that every time I've tried the ladder, that puts the birds on the level up here. They stick their butt right in the face of the birds on the level down here, and
What are you saying, Rip? They don't like this. They don't like to sleep sniffing their neighbor's butt.
not necessarily. No.
Okay, all right.
Plus, there's more and more squabbles about who gets to go up there.
Isn't
I
that the trick?
Yeah, I learned early on, keeping my small backyard flock that having a ladder type roost only elevated the stress and just too many arguments. I actually had Americanas going to bed before the sun even got close to going down, just so she could be on the top rung, right? She was in there an hour and a half before dark, up there on that top. So yeah,
There,
I went to a level roost and all that quit.
it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And if you go back and you look at some of the designs for the old turn of the last century uh, poultry housing, they pretty much all had roost that were flat and level. There was a reason for that they did that. Um, Noah Sturgill says platform is the only way to go and keep peace the whole time.
Yes, sir.
Gonna avoid the drama. Yeah.
Yeah, there's plenty of drama. That's for sure. But Rip, you went way over. I mean, you went past of course I'm a feed guy, but you went past the feed and water space, pretty quickly there.
Have at it.
I don't know that people really, in all honesty, people need to measure, they need to know the width of their bird, right? So if I'm measuring from, each side, wing to wing, is that bird 6 inches? Is it 8 inches? Is it 10 inches? So if you're using a trough feeder, that's pretty much the amount of feeder space you need for that bird, right? And you need that much for every bird. Let me give you the exception to that. So the people that still continue to free choice feed their birds and not limit feed their birds, it doesn't really matter, right? But for the people that are managing at a higher level and controlling the amount of feed that their birds get, you got to have space for every bird to eat at the same time. Now, if you choose to use a round feeder, if it's a 6-inch bird, I need you cut that number in half. I need 3 inches of circumference for that bird to eat. Okay. And people need to pay attention to that. And, I see it all the time. Oh, they'll take turns. Oh, they'll share. They haven't really spent a lot of time watching their chickens. I have never seen chickens willfully share anything. Okay. Go out there and drop something that they all really love and watch what they do. One picks it up and runs away, right? She tries to find a lonely space to enjoy it by herself.
Which very seldom happens.
Chickens are not sharers. Okay. Don't happen.
Not at all.
No.
Jeff, is there any advantage? And I think I've heard you talk about this before, but let's say we're using hanging trough feeders, the little PVC pipe things you can make yourself. Is there advantage to having them in 2 different locations?
Okay, you don't really want that trough much more than 4 or 5 feet long. So, if you're doing the homemade PVC, you get 2 5-footers. But I like to have separation because there's always going to be timid birds and they will not push in and compete the way they should. And they're always going to be behind. Right. And then we blame it on, oh, it's genetic or something else. Well, is it, or is it social? Is it the social atmosphere that's keeping that bird held back? So, opportunity to eat, making sure that, don't do your measurements too tight, right? So if I said 10 inches per bird or whatever, the width of your bird is, you should have at least a 20% excess or leftover space, right? And that helps those timid birds get an opportunity to eat. And so whether you have 2 feeders or you have excessive amount of feed space, whatever that takes, right? But people don't really think about it. And my analogy is, when I was a kid growing up at Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner, the kids never got to sit at the big table, right? Because there wasn't enough room. So we're all eating around a coffee table or whatever, right? You kind of feel left out. So your chickens are really not any different than that. So you got to have room for everybody to sit at the table.
Good. That's a good analogy too. We were talking about roost, and you want to be careful and not get the roost too high.
You want to read Larry's there?
Oh yeah, here we go. Larry Margita says, my roosting is set at 20 inches high, one level, way better than when I had different levels. Everybody wanted to be on a higher level. Indeed, that's the case.
And 20 inches, that's good, right? 20 inches
particularly
high.
for some of those bigger breeds, like the Orpingtons and the Asiatics and all that, the Jersey Giants. If you got 3 or 4 foot roost and they're up there on that and they hop down off that, those big birds can really damage your legs.
I would almost add to what we're talking about right now, Rip, is your roost height really depends on the bird's weight, So
yeah,
like Larry, if he's got 8 and 10 pound birds, I think 24 inches is fine. My birds were all 4 to 6 pounds and they did very well at about 36 inches off the ground. If you've got 2 pound bantams, 1.5 to 2.5 pound bantams, they love being up at like 6 foot off the ground. Okay. So I think, you got to have a sliding scale based on body weight. And, people that are doing turkeys, when we did our turkey field trials, if we got more than a foot off the ground, there's no way those 30-pound toms were getting on that roost, right? And like you said, it's a big gamble to injury, if you get them too far up.
So talking about weight, I'm going to bring up a subject that I know Karen's going to be chopping it a bit to make a comment about, and that is weigh your birds regularly. Didn't you do that, Karen?
No, never.
You were the weighing queen.
Yes.
What did you learn about your birds doing that?
Everything? No, I'm kidding. um, I can't generalize that. You didn't tell me that was coming. So yeah.
That's when you do your best, is when we spring it on you.
Yeah, no, I didn't get it that time. Yeah. I don't know.
Well, if they're growing, you want to make sure that they're putting on weight properly.
It
You
is
want-
it is the first time you realize something's wrong, right? And I feel like it often hits where you're talking about. Like, your birds weren't crowded last week. Well, guess what? They all gained almost a pound in this last week.
Mhm.
And now they are. And now they're showing it, right? Like they're, so I do feel like it is a very early indicator of something going wrong before you can, always see it. But
Plus, one of the advantages to weighing them regularly, if you're into raising meat birds especially, is it helps you monitor their feed conversion ratio. How much feed do they have to eat to put on a pound of weight? For most of us, that may not be as important, but for those who are raising birds for processing, it really is important, because the more feed they consume, the more it costs you per pound to raise that bird. So that's another advantage in weighing your birds. And as long as you got them in your hands weighing them, be sure and go over them too. You want to check for fleshing, particularly in the breast and the thighs. Uh, any skeletal issues like crooked keel bones or roached backs where they've got that hump in their back where it shouldn't be. Um, you really can't learn about your birds without getting your hands on them and feeling what's going on underneath those feathers. Those feathers lay on top of each other like dominoes that got tipped over. Um, and they can really hide a lot about what the body is doing underneath them. So get your hands on them, learn how to evaluate your birds, uh, and do it on a regular basis. You'll be surprised what you learn about your birds by doing that.
Well, and people are always, it's one of the biggest questions is how am I going to separate my birds before I can tell males from females? And weighing is for most breeds, an early indicator as well of that.
Yes.
So.
And, once you get into that habit and you've had your birds for a long time, you can begin to pick out the males and the females much earlier than you did when you first started. It's one of those things that takes a little time and a little experience to do that.
And you don't have to have it right from the first time, right?
No.
Separate your males and your females and then keep doing it when you see a boy.
Right.
Oh, look. Yeah.
You're not supposed to be in here.
That's right. But I mean,
Rip,
it's not like if you get it wrong that all is lost, it just.
So, Karen, how many birds were you keeping? So, just as a reference point, I'm not,
Yeah. So in the later half, I'd raise out about 300 a year. So not a huge amount.
But were you weighing all those 300?
Yeah.
Were you? Okay. You're exceptional.
Yeah.
You're just exceptional.
I told you she's a weighing queen.
I know. But I just wonder that, people that are keeping too many birds from year to year, if it becomes a daunting task. You know what I'm saying? Is like, if you had 50 birds or 20 birds or, whatever you've got, Rip, it's not that big a deal, right? It doesn't take you very long. But, for the collectors, not the breeders, but the collectors, the people who can't cull as they should, that's a lot of weighing. And that's, you can chew up a big day, just weighing birds if you're keeping too many. So, I hope people are culling along the way or separating along the way. If for the people that have the dual purpose and want the meat or whatever later down the road, you can start separating those pretty early in life and feed them completely separate or completely different way.
Yeah.
You can kind of put them on, I don't want to use this term, but you can kind of put them on autopilot or, almost ignore just feeding water every day. But
that's what I call set it and forget it poultry management.
Okay. Sound like the old Ronco commercial. Just set it and forget it. right?
Shh, don't give away all my sources.
Okay.
But that's exactly right. You end up with a pen or multiple pens of birds that are not going to become breeders. And so if you
Yeah.
maybe they don't get all the advantages of your
But I
of your
mean,
potentials. Yeah.
hanging around with you two and other breeders, you can start seeing those defects even at hatch, but you can see it, all the way along as they develop, right? So as you're seeing defects, they ought to be going into the meat pen, right? And just treat them differently.
Exactly right. It will improve your flock in the long run if you learn how to do that and will practice it.
Call hard, call often. So
And I'm just gonna say one more time, if you can do it at night, everything is so much easier when the birds are
oh yeah.
calmer. You can
Yeah.
my
Don't
Rhode
chase
Island
them
Reds, I
around.
could pick them up off the roost and wait and put it back and just go to the next one. No chasing, no nothing. They just wait. They're like, okay, what are we doing? Okay, fine. Yeah.
That takes all the fun out of it, though,
So,
if you don't have to chase them.
It's up to you. Everybody has their own choices. Yeah. But don't be looking for color defects in the dark with your headlamp
No,
on. Yeah.
no. I don't really look for colored defects in party-colored birds until they're pretty much mature. Chicks are going to go through 3 different molts before they get their adult plumage. And every time those colored birds, lace birds, pencil birds especially, every time they molt, their pattern changes until they finally put on those adult feathers, and then boom, there they are in all their colored glory.
Yeah, I had one person tell me that once she started doing it at night in the dark, she was feeling her birds better and not letting her eyes deceive her quite as much. So
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rip, you were talking about feeling. So all right.
Not feelings. Yeah.
I know. No. But he was talking about picking his birds up and feeling them. So and I might be wrong, and I want you to tell me if I am, but for me, I found it almost easiest to determine if a bird's too fat by feeling the pubic bones.
Yep,
Right?
exactly.
So if they're rounded and, soft feeling, then, to me, the bird's fat. And if they feel fairly pointy, to the touch, then we're close on body fat. It's not perfect. That's not a perfect measurement, but that's an easy one to me to detect.
Not only is an easy one, it's one that the majority of people just don't bother to make.
I don't know why.
And they could save their birds, save their feed, save their birds. Sue Dobson, don't get mad at me, but I want to spill the beans on you. Sue and I were talking just the other day, and she talked about her birds being more productive this year than they were last year. And she said it's because she listened to you, Jeff, and took your advice and got the weight off of them.
I wish I could take my own advice, but it ain't happening.
And that's the truth. Me too. While you're handling them, it's perfect time to periodically check for external parasites. Mites, lice, they're usually more active at night anyway. So while you got them in your hands, just tip them over and look around the vent, flip up a wing and look under the wings and the base of the neck. And if you see some bugs, then you need to properly treat the whole flock. And if you find bugs, don't put it off treating them, because it's surprising how much just even a moderate amount of external parasites can really drag down a bird in a hurry.
In a hurry.
Yeah.
They take more blood out of that bird than people realize.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So even if you flip them over and you see a few, and nighttime is the perfect time with a good bright headlamp, flip them over, just kind of fan through those feathers, looking down near the bottom and look for them. And I find that the mites seem to be worse spring and fall
Mm-hmm.
when the seasons are changing, and so if you only have time to do it twice, depending on where you live, think about March, April. Now's a good time to do it, depending on where you live. And then sometime around October is also usually a good time. So the mites are looking for a home for winter.
And I'm just going to throw this out there. I do not suggest that you do routine preventative treatments for parasites, internal or external, or even some disease preventatives like coccidiosis, because some of those treatments will put a little bit of a drain on your birds too. So I prefer it only to treat and medicate if I have a problem, and not just take that kind of shotgun approach I see so many folks recommending. Um, Parasites, internal parasites, uh, probably a good idea to become a bit of a poopologist. And as you're walking around in your coop, just look down and see what the poop looks like. Is it firm? Is it really loose and watery? Is it bloody? We did a whole show on that about a year or so ago. And Jeff was kind enough to pull together a whole series of slides on the different kinds of chicken poop. So go back and look up that show because it will really help you. It will reveal a lot to you. Um, we're getting, at least here in Florida, we're already hitting all close to 90 degrees already. So summertime is coming before we know it. So be prepared, particularly on your young birds. Be prepared to deal with the hot summer temperatures. The basics of plenty of shade, get the air moving, plenty of cool water that's changed regularly will do wonders. And if you feel like you need to, use my brain just went blank. Electrolytes. Yeah, thank you.
We didn't help at all. Yeah.
No, but and Jeff's really made it easy. Pertrail has now put together a product called Simple Six, and it has all the goodies in there that will help your birds deal with the hot summer stress. Actually, it'll help them deal with any kind of stress. Taking them to a show, being at a show, being shipped or whatever. Uh, and it's he's got it all mixed up in a, what is it, quart jug?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, right? So we've sold some quarts, and when people reorder, they've been asking for the 2.5 gallon containers. Okay, they're going all the way from quarts to 2.5 gallons, and I'm like, what are you doing with this? Oh, I love it. Just all. I mean, it. I just figure they got a lot of birds or something. I don't know, but it's.
Well, I know John Gunnerman says he had a glass full every morning, so maybe that's where it's going.
Yeah, yeah, he likes it. So
Speaking of the heat stress and this grow out topic,
Mm-hmm.
that also seems to hit as they get older all at once.
Yes.
Right? Like,
Yes.
so I mean, a 4-week-old chick has no problem with heat stress, right? Do you know what I mean?
usually.
Like, but it just keeps, depending on how big your birds are, you're at like 16, 17 weeks. Now all of a sudden it matters a little bit more.
Well, it's kind of like the bigger the bodies, the more trouble they have. It's like me and some guy who's about as big around as a fence post. Heat doesn't affect him as much as it does this fat man. I mean, I sweat like a little boy writing his first love letter. It's horrible.
Never heard that one before. Thanks,
Oh,
Rip.
I
I'm gonna
gave you a
chalk
new
that
one.
one. Yeah, you got me a new one. So
And the other thing is when our birds are dealing with this hot weather, and Karen, you probably saw it with your reds. I know I see it with mine on a regular basis. If you're trying to grow out reds in the summer, it is a hard job to do because those temperatures goes up, their activity levels and feed consumption goes down.
Yeah.
And they just kind of sit there and vegetate until we start getting some cooler weather in the fall.
Yep.
Um, and particularly if you're raising dual purpose birds, large meat birds,
Yeah, you want
heavily
to.
feathered birds.
I would try. The goal was to get them adult-ish, basically, before before the temperature averaged above 80. Like, otherwise, yeah, they're eating, yeah.
They're just sitting there looking at you like, what's going on with this temperature?
Yeah. All right, it's time, Jeff. So, what do you call an acid with an attitude? Amino acid. Yep. There's your science pun.
I've
today.
preached about amino acids long enough over the last 2 years. I shouldn't have to say it out loud anymore.
I need to get one of those shirts. Where did you get that?
I don't know. You're going to have to ask Carol Wilson. So Grimes Cadillac.
Yeah, Carol. That sounds like something Carol would come up with.
Yeah. She got tired of me talking about amino acids, so she just bought me this T-shirt. So what's a feed guy supposed to wear?
Whatever you want, I think.
That works for
let's
me.
not go that far.
Not a 55-gallon barrel. You cannot wear that to the live stream.
To try to get us back on topic here, we're talking about birds from 12 weeks to 24 weeks. Some breeds are going to be laying before they hit that 24-week mark. So you need to plan ahead, be aware of that, and have your nest boxes in place and ready to go to accommodate those breeds who mature faster. You want to make sure the nest boxes are in the proper location. And we've talked about this before. Usually in the darkest part of the coop is where they like to nest. You want to make sure that the nests are of the right size. If the nests are too big and you're raising leghorns, you can get a couple of birds trying to nest in one box at the same time. I don't know what their pension is for doing that, but it is. If they're too small, those big old bushel-butted Orpingtons and all that have a hard time getting in there to lay. So do some checking. I like to go about, for leghorns, I like about a 12-inch. For dual-purpose breeds, 14 inches. And for those bigger birds, 15 inches or maybe even more, depending on the breed. Just as a rough guideline.
Well, now back to the roost comment.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You also don't want your nest boxes too high or too low, depending on that weight.
Yep.
But if you get them too close to the ground, they'll lay under the nest boxes. So if for people that are hanging them on a wall, which I subscribe to, then, you got to be careful. Mm-hmm. So it seems like between 16 and 24 inches is the right height for most birds. If you go any lower than 16, there's too much of a shadow under there, and they think it's okay to lay. So,
yep. And the other thing to be mindful of is you don't want to put your nest boxes higher than your roost are, because invariably they're going to try to get into the nest box to roost, and they're going to go in the box, turn around, facing outward, and then poop in that box all night long. And then you got dirty eggs to contend with the next day long. Learned that one the hard way.
Doesn't everybody enjoy washing eggs? I mean,
Nope.
Isn't that our favorite pastime? Yeah.
Not even close.
Well, and when you're talking about that, you talked about the too big, and this is funny, right? And that we all see them do it. The 10 nest boxes, and they all want to use the same two.
Mm-hmm.
But what you just said, dirty eggs, broken eggs, overheating when they all pile in there to lay for 3 hours, and there's 3 of them in that space.
It doesn't even have to be summer for that to happen.
Yeah. But I feel like Jeff usually talks about that there might be something about those 2 boxes that.
I mean,
I agree with that.
If you're using multiple nests, they're going to jump on a perch rail. And what they do is, I like flipping my bucket over and watching my chickens, but they stick their head in the box, they look for an egg. They stick their head in the box, they go down the perch rail until they run out of perch rail, right? And then they always lay in the end box. Now, whether you want to cut some cardboard, you want to fabricate something, put some blocks, put some dividers, if you will, or a barricade. That's the word I'm looking for, on those perch rail to create more corners, right? And that'll spread out where your birds lay.
Excellent idea.
And you got to have curtains on those nest boxes. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
You do not want a large amount of light going in there. You're just encouraging peck outs, and then somebody's going to call me and tell me they got a blowout, and I'm going to say, no, you're full of, manure, because, in 28 years of doing this, I think I've only seen 2 true blowouts. Okay. And most of the time it's from hens sharing a nest and there's too much light in that nest box. So if we control the environment, we can usually control most of the problems. Anyway,
if you're just a student of your birds and really make an effort to sit and study them and watch what they do and how they respond in certain situations, there's ways to sort of coerce them, if that's the right word, into doing a better job at what you want them to do. This takes a little study and a little effort on our part sometimes.
I don't know why people don't want to watch their birds anyway. I mean,
it's highly entertaining.
I'd come home from work, go out, flip over a bucket, get a glass of iced tea or whatever, and just sit there and watch the birds for a half hour. And it's fabulous entertainment, right? I used to call it redneck entertainment, but it's good for anybody. I don't care who you are. Yeah. It's extremely therapeutic. It's almost as good as having an aquarium.
And you find it too common, too relaxing, just throw a handful of mealworms out there and the fun begins. Karen's smiling.
Let's define some terms. My chickens tore up and ate the curtains. So,
well, what was the curtain?
Yeah, well, but that's part of it, right? So your curtain in your state is anything that causes them to be darkened. I mean, they don't have to be gingham or lace or
Years ago,
cloth curtains do not work well. So most commercial nest boxes come with a heavy vinyl, similar to what billboards are made out of. For years I told people go to a really good landscaping store where they sell the pond supplies for people to have fish ponds in their backyard. And here you could buy that really thin rubber membrane by the foot, right? So you could go in and tell the guy, hey, I want 10 foot of that, right? And he charge you by the foot. So you could just go, you could buy that. And that really thin rubber membrane held up really, really well. So you tack it on, you cut in your slits, and it lasts for years.
Did you find just one slit down the middle worked, or I've seen some where they had multiple slits in there? I'm doing
multiple slits, about every 2 inches. And depending on how you attach it at the top, of the nest box. So when they're pullets, and you're training them, you can actually fold those up and tuck them in behind, and that you can leave the nest box fairly open. Right. So while the pullets are in that inquisitive stage and they're changing over, you were talking about having nest boxes in there early and you didn't really define it, but I really like the pullets to have close to 4 weeks with nest boxes just to figure out what nest boxes are. Right. Get in there, be curious. If you want to put some fake eggs in there, you want to put some golf balls in there or something, just to kind of get their brain thinking about this is where I lay an egg. But
I just feel like there's always been a disconnect between there's patterns out there to make your curtains for your chickens, and then like you saying it always seemed, I can't get the word right, the incongruous, like where I don't really think he cares if they have pretty curtains. It's a functional thing.
Well, yeah. The pretty curtains are the ones they seem to go after and tear up.
What do you mean? You can't have bougie curtains on your head?
You can. But unless you're going to put out a fertile pattern, I think you got to define the curtain sometimes.
Yeah. No, you need something that's moisture.
So more like a garage, an old school garage door or freezer, like a drive-in freezer with the flaps.
Yep.
Years ago, those metal nest boxes used to come with curtains in them, and it was a pretty heavy cotton duck material, almost like a lightweight canvas. But eventually they would get beat up and banged up and
Wow.
have to be replaced. But
Right. You're going to replace those every 2 to 3 years.
yeah,
Just they can't take the wear and tear of the chickens going in and out. And once they fray and you get a loose
that's it.
edge, the
That's it.
chicken's going to eat them. Right. That's where the eating begins.
I,
Remind me tomorrow. I can post pictures to the group of what I'm talking about. And some people need pictures, paint by numbers, and
and that's
so I
fine.
can
That's
I
fine.
can accommodate.
Jeff, I got to say, I don't think I would have ever hit on the idea of the pond liner, but that would be the perfect stuff to use.
It is. It's great. And you don't cut it. You put it up whole as a single piece, right? And you get it all
Mhm.
aligned, and then you come back with a people listen to me, with a new fresh utility knife blade, not an old one, or a good pair of scissors, and you make your cuts. Okay.
Do you suppose it would be all right with Mary if I did that and would ask if I could borrow her good sewing scissors?
I don't think so. You're on your own. You better go to Harbor Freight and get you a fresh pair.
Dang. One more thing to buy. No. um, I have totally lost my place here. Okay.
Yeah,
Turn
but
the
we're
page.
having fun. You can lose
We
your
are.
place, Rip. Don't worry about your
I know.
outline. Just have fun.
Give me long enough, I'll lose my place multiple times.
Okay.
Um, and another thing, when you're starting out at that sort of 12-week window with your birds, that's a good time to give all your birds um, uh, going over with your hands, and that can help you determine which ones may be your potential breeder candidates and which ones won't. One thing that I've learned from my mentor was you don't want the top 10%, 10 to 15% of the birds. You don't want those that grow real fast, real big, and you don't want the bottom 15% because those are your underperformers. But you want to select birds in that middle group. And I asked him why that was one time, and he looked at me like I had lost my mind, and he said, "That's where you get your uniformity from."
Which is something you're looking for. You need
Yeah,
standouts, but you ultimately are looking to be able to make
right.
a flock that can.
If been my experience, if you breed extremes, you're going to wind up with more extremes and not what you really want. The
I
extremes are not going to be your better producers long term.
Rip, we probably should do some questions. I noticed that Karen has a bunch highlighted that
She's
we
been
need
flagging
to.
away
I
quicker than
know.
all get out. Go
I'm
for it,
sure
Karen.
you're only halfway through your outline, but we need to answer
No,
these
I'm
questions
getting
too.
close to your part.
Okay. My part? All right.
Yeah.
We'll skip my part. We'll just answer questions.
I want to give a tip first. If you are weighing or doing anything else routinely, and it doesn't, again, same thing. It's never an all or nothing. So I would highlight the birds when I think like this bird's probably not going to make it. He's going to get a pink, he, she, whatever, is going to get a pink highlight on their line to look at them extra special next week. So there were next weeks when I could not figure out what in the world I thought was wrong with this bird. So it just goes away. He just goes back to, what I mean? But if you thought you didn't like it last week and you still don't like it this week, maybe you can just quit evaluating that bird and
Yeah,
take it off
chances
your
are you're
to-do
not going
list.
to like him when he
Yeah.
matures out.
Yeah. So that's part of what you were saying, the weights. You know what I mean? So that's a real easy, right?
Yeah,
These
a
these
good
are
tip.
these are in the going, these are in the possible going, and
Good
maybe
tip.
they climb their
Good
way to
tip.
the middle next week. So okay,
All right.
quit talking, he said. All
Question time.
right. Stacy, at what age do you recommend providing roost to young birds? I've had occasional keel problems. Talk about a giant
Yeah.
subject
Okay.
with.
Look, they want to roost pretty much after 3 or 4 days after they hatch.
Yeah, they will.
And you just really need to be careful what you're using for that roost bar. You definitely don't want any 90-degree angles,
No.
pressing into that. So, I mean, I always used a 2x2. right?
Yeah.
But at 3 weeks old, they don't need to be that. But hopefully, you got a friend with a router who can put round edges on those boards, whatever you decide to use. I mean, you're going to start out with like a 1x2 or a 1x3. So if you go buy that as dimensional lumber at Lowe's, Home Depot, wherever you go, a 1x3 is already okay. So the slightly rounded edge is called chamfering. That is already a chamfered edge, right? And then as they get bigger, you go from a 1x3 to a 2x2, and if you've got really big birds, New Hamps or Orpingtons or something like that, you're going to end up at a 2x4. But you want to make sure that you've got that rounded edge. So you don't have a compression point that is a sharp, 90 degree or corner.
And folks, if you don't think that young chicks like to roost, and if you use trough type feeders with the little tops on them, and you go in there first thing in the morning, they're all lined up, doop, 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 right down the top of that thing. That's why they like
Sue
to roost.
uses crepe myrtle trees, make good roost. And Larry was saying he gets about 3 inch for mature birds. I agree with 3 inches from the forest, but if you go out and you actually cut down some saplings of different sizes and put them in there,
Mm-hmm.
if you're actually using a true piece of tree, not purchased lumber, it's already round, right? It's perfect. It's actually what they were designed to roost on. So
yep, their feet conform to that real nicely.
And if you're trying to deal with keel issues, providing the roost is going to let them show. Denying the roost means you'll just hide it very well.
and speaking from experience.
Yeah.
Mandel and Royal and I and John have talked about this a good bit, both on and off our podcast. But I tend to come down that most of the keel issues that we see are genetic. Because when I talk to folks, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the roost that they're using. And even Madeline said when she started culling really heavy for keel issues, within a few years, they kind of went away.
And I don't think it's ever from the old books, from the research stations, from the lines of birds they kept for this very purpose. They had straight keeled lines of birds they pulled from, and they had crooked keeled lines of birds they pulled from. Mm-hmm. And even in the straight keeled lines, bred for decades to be that, they still had like a 20% incidence of crooked keels. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's not an all or nothing.
It's kind of a little bit of both, I think.
But those birds eat the same as one with a straight keel. I can tell you.
Yeah.
Not a problem there.
If you want to waste your money, yeah, that's what you're saying. Yeah.
That's like my grandfather was fussing at me. I don't know. I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I was plowing out furrows for him to plant the corn. He said, "Your furrows are really crooked." And that's the first time I ever made my grandfather mad when I told him, I said, "Well, Papa, you can grow more corn in a crooked road than you can in a straight road."
Yeah.
Bad move on
you're
my
alive
part.
today, Rick.
I am too.
All right.
What else you got?
All right. You mentioned birds having damaged feathers back when we were overcrowding.
Yes.
Is there a way to fix the feathers? Some roosters that like to get in the nest box and damage their tail feathers.
There's really not. Most all of the times when a feather gets damaged, it's physical damage. And the only way I know that we can deal with that, particularly an exhibition bird, is if you've got time, about 90 days or so, just to be on the safe side, pull the feather out and let it regrow.
So it's more of a prevention issue than it is.
It's exactly.
So, and do you prevent it by
If
stopping?
I had a rooster going in the nest boxes, I think I'd call that sucker.
Well, it depends on how well he laid.
Yeah, he doesn't lay at all. He's just a waste of time.
Well, hold on now. There's different reasons
Okay.
to go into the nest box. No, I'm not against culling, but I had multiple males that would invite the girls into the box and leave. So it's not like they
Okay.
lived in the nest box. It was just part of their.
I didn't know that was a behavior. Thank you, Karen.
Well, and it might not be.
So,
It might be my bird.
yeah.
You know, I
But-
can't help but wonder, is that more common in nest boxes that don't have curtains than do have curtains?
I would think so.
Okay.
And is the nest boxes too large?
Yep.
That's the other question. Because
And
he
same
really
thing, are they
shouldn't
high?
fit in there. Yeah.
Are they high? Are they, is that where they want to sleep? Because it's the best spot in the house, But, all right. Lori asked, at what age do they have the adult feathers, Rip, when you're talking about color?
Lori, it's going to vary with breed. Leghorns, for example, they'll be putting on their adult plumage probably around 4 months. The reds that I raise, not so much. They're going to be 6 or 7 months. And a lot of it depends on what area of the country you live in. And this is something we were talking about before we went on air, is most people don't really understand how much of a role geography plays in what our birds do and how they perform and how they develop. It's amazing. But my reds, usually by 6 months, my females were pretty much all feathered in. What I go by on party colored birds is if you wait until all of their primary feathers, adult primary feathers, have grown in, you can pretty much safely cull for color at that point. And Karen and I did a show one time where we pointed out what an immature primary feather looks like. They're kind of long, tapered, and pointed. And whereas mature primary is going to be very much rounded on the end. Gosh, Karen, that's been probably what, two years?
I was thinking, that was a bit there. All right, I'm not sure if this is so much of it's a little bit of a question. So, Minden Hills Homestead, I free range a lot of my birds after breeding season. I find they get a bit more reactive to handling after I let them go versus in the breeding pens. So that's part of and we were talking about the weighing too. I can set my bird on the scale, stand on the scale. Go ahead, stand there while I get your weight. Thank you. You can go. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? But some of that's the nighttime part. But
well,
definitely they get used to what they do, right?
And I'm assuming she's talking about reactive in a negative fashion.
Yeah.
Being handled. When they're in a small coop or pen, you're going in there on a regular basis. They're accustomed to you being in there. They're accustomed to you feeding. They're accustomed to you watering. They're accustomed to you feeding, handling. And the more you do that, the more relaxed they become. But then when they're out footloose and fancy free after the breeding season, they forget all that training and it just all goes south. So yeah, I can believe that. What we got next, Karen?
Well, if you want to go here, although some people have already answered him in the comments, but Noah wanted to know what the best non-chemical way was to get rid of bugs.
You put sulfur in the feed. The rate is 5 pounds per ton, and I realize you're not making that much feed, but it's 5 pounds per ton. We can work it down to a percentage, but it's like 0.25% of the feed. And we've talked about dusting dust baths in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Dust baths are great. You're looking at about 80% peat moss, about 15% diatomaceous earth, and 5% elemental sulfur that you can get powdered sulfur at pretty much any garden center, and just kind of mix that together into tubs that they can get in and dust bathe in.
Yeah,
put
Karen,
it someplace it'll stay dry.
Yeah. Karen, didn't you put wood ashes in yours too?
I didn't, just because I didn't really have access to it, but I know a lot of people do. But all
ashes are great. If you got access to wood or coal ashes, that's my first choice. And you can use them just plain. You don't do anything with them. You just Well, you let them cool off first, and then you can put them in the dust bath.
But all that, um, Jeff, all that is tiny bit more on the preventative side than my bird is covered in bugs right this minute.
Yeah,
Isn't
if
it?
somebody's got, a severe amount, I mean, if he's got an infestation, and to me, that's when you pick up the bird, and when you put them back down, you got bugs on your hand kind of level. Yeah, you're really going to have to treat them. I mean, I hate to say it. Um, there's some natural stuff out there that probably works close to as good as ivermectin, but you know, a little bit of ivermectin is probably the easiest way out, and it has the least amount of withholding, egg withholding. That's probably the least damaging of all the wormers out there.
And that just jogged my two brain cells talking about external parasites, uh, mites especially. Uh, Most of them are bloodsuckers, but not all. If you're handling your birds and you see some very fine lines that go straight across the feather from side to side, that's feather mite damage. They actually eat the feathers of your bird. So spraying or treating with something that requires the birds to actually ingest it or it get into their system so the mites get it and kills them doesn't work. So you're going to have to result. I had a real bout with feather mites one year, and I finally had to dip my birds. I used permethrin dip and just totally submerged the birds
That's
in
what
that.
Sue was saying, isn't? So there's pyrethrum and there's permethrum.
Hmm.
All right. So the pyrethrum comes from the chrysanthemum flower, and that is 100% all natural, and there is product available. Permethrum is the chemical lab made, but it's still a chemical. It's still considered fairly natural, um, but I wouldn't label it as all natural. But yeah, and I forgot about dipping birds. So you can make up a strong solution, with permethrin or the other one that I just went out of my head, pyrethrum. Um, and there's nothing wrong with dipping birds if you learn how to do it, and you keep their head out of the water.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with dipping birds. So
I would submerge mine all the way up to right about there.
yep.
And that's how I
And
finally beat the feather mites.
actually, dipping twice a year is not a bad idea either. When the mites are really active, that might be a really good thing to consider doing. So, or do it, where you have plenty of time prior to the show so that you don't have feather damage for the exhibition poultry folks. But
All right. So just to confirm, I'm going to make you say the breed name for me, Rip. But 15 inches nest box, good for.
Breast?
Mm-hmm.
I started to wait and see if you'd take a shot
Nope.
at it, but
Nope.
uh, probably 15. Uh,
are they that wide?
some of them are, yeah. Some of them can get pretty.
I mean, maybe 3-year-olds. I wouldn't think, one.
Oh,
I don't know. I
first
don't
year
know that.
pullets probably not so much. You could probably get by with somewhere 13, 14 inches.
Okay.
But
All right. I think this might be the last question, but um, let's see. Carrie uses 2x4s for roosts. I like to have them on them and a piece of deck board capped on the top for them to rest on. Is that too big? Okay, so the 2x4s with a cap that's easily cleaned on it.
And a 5/4 deck board is 5.5 inches wide. So and Rip, you cut me off if I'm wrong, but I really, based on the foot pad of the bird, I want the toenails off the front, and I want the toenail off the back, so they're actually gripping into the roost. Um, I don't really want the nails on the roost, on top of or the surface of the
Like
roost.
they're sitting
It's
on a table. Yeah.
yeah. It seems like to me when those birds are sitting like that, where their toenails are on a flat surface, that tends to make them more fidgety and more uncomfortable than if those nails are off on both sides. That's why I think why you see so many pictures of birds taken at a show, and they're plopped on this flat, hard surface, and the birds kind of hunker down, and they don't like it.
It doesn't have a natural feel for them.
No,
I mean, even if they're standing on the dirt or something, right? Those toenails are recessed into the dirt. It's a different feel. I don't think the pressure points on the bottom of the foot are right if the nails have that much pressure to them, right? So
probably so.
that was just my observation. I have nothing to prove anything that I said.
No, I
Just
agree. I don't
okay.
either, and it's just what I've noticed birds do.
Yeah.
If you want to hear about more of my mistakes, what sounded perfect after the big roost talks were the if you have more money than sense, getting the chair railing, I mean the stair railing
Hmm.
Right.
at Home Depot, and it turned out both kinds were just extra slippery. Do you know what I mean? Like they were so sanded that I ended up roughing them up a bit to
Yeah.
because the
They're
birds
too
would get
smooth.
up and then and then
Yeah.
fall off the other side. So
They're
shape,
sanded, ready to be
wonderful.
varnished,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
yeah, they're going to be too smooth.
There you go.
Okay, Barbara
So,
Rochelle has a question down here.
and that was the part you wanted me to talk about anyway.
There you go. I'm constantly confused
Barbara,
about.
did he pay you to type that in there?
I did not. I swear, I did not.
I
Um,
didn't, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
I know that.
so
All
Jeff,
right.
what
So,
say you?
okay. This is really too simple, folks. All right. So, if your breed matures or you assume first egg at 24 weeks, okay, you divide from day 1 to 24 weeks into threes. Right. So you've got 3/8. So you got 8 weeks of starter, 8 weeks of grower, and 8 weeks of developer. Okay. So whatever that maturing time is from hatch to first egg, divide by 3, and that'll tell you how many weeks of each phase to feed for optimum performance. Now, I'd much rather do it by weight, but get it. The thing with show birds or exhibition birds or heritage birds, we don't know what they're supposed to weigh at each one of those intervals, right? There's no data to tell us what the weight is. If we knew what that weight was, then I would say, okay, take your Rhode Island Red or your Delaware to here, right, on weight, and then switch to grower. Then you go to here, and when you hit this weight, then you go to developer until first egg, and then you switch over to layer feed, right? So, so the easiest way is to figure out that maturing, that when that breed should lay the first egg, divide that total weeks by 3, and that'll tell you how many weeks in each phase.
I'm going to make a confession here, and I know what I did was I would follow that schedule pretty closely, but instead of keeping them on grower all the way up to 24 weeks, I would switch them over to layer mash well before I probably should have. So that's something to be mindful of. Now, Jeff, I think I've heard you say that.
Yeah, you don't want to take them over too early. 2 weeks, 3 weeks early as a pullet going on layer feed doesn't bother me.
Yeah,
right?
I didn't do that.
But folks that want to go, say, 12 weeks or 14 weeks on starter feed, which is way too long because you're hurting the kidneys that way by feeding excess of protein, then going straight over to layer feed, then you're going too early and you're building up calcium in the renal system, right? So you could affect long-term egg lay, longevity, whatever. So, I mean, I just gave you the ideal. It's like 8 weeks of starter, 8 weeks of grower, 8 weeks of developer. So
Hey, what's the difference between those feeds?
again, it's a little bit different based on breed, but I'm going to use a generic recommendation. Um, if the amino acids are right, remember the shirt. Okay. If the amino acids are right, you want about a 22% starter. You want an 18 or 19% grower, and you want about a 16 and a half, 17% developer, right? And the key difference in the developer is we do slightly elevate the calcium. So the calcium in the starter and the grower is going to be about 1.2%. And when we get to developer, we want about 2% just to start building up calcium in the bone mass. So when she does start laying, she's going to lay, she's going to have plenty of calcium for the eggshells. Protein is the big one. Amino acids come down gradually with each one of those step downs, but not a lot, right? So starter feed, I'm looking at 1.3 lysine, 0.55 methionine. Grower, I'm looking at 1.2 lysine, 0.52 methionine. Developer, I'm looking at 1.1 lysine, 0.48 to 0.5 on the methionine. But it's just.
And two little administrative things, just so that we know who to trust, you or Sue. Did you mean charcoal ash, or was that a
coal ash? Coal ash. So people who burn coal, like in our region here, you can buy coal to burn in your house. So I don't care if it's wood pellet ash, coal ash, wood ash. If you're burning, hardwoods,
but not from the grill, right? You don't make your
No.
hamburgers
No,
and
no,
then
no.
Well,
okay.
honestly, you could use that. I mean, truthfully, you can use that. There's nothing wrong with it because it is wood that's been charcoaled that turns into another form of ash. When I showed up with ash the first time for my hens, it was coal ash from a friend, and he saved it for me. And once I figured it out, the next time I refilled it, it was odd. What I found odd is a bunch of them ran up and started eating it first before they even started dust bathing. And so they know that there's something good in their farm, right? Whether it's the high levels of sulfur or whatever. But there is nothing more hilarious than going out and seeing your hen buried all the way to her wattles in ashes. Okay. It is. Then she stands up and she has this ghostly look.
Yeah.
Now, don't do this right before you're going to go to a show. Okay.
No.
Because getting all those ashes washed out of there is going to be, horrible. But
All right, Rip, anything else you want to tell us about?
The only thing I want to mention before we go is that I know some of you listen to the Poultry Keepers podcast, and we're going to be doing a really cool recording tomorrow. Jeff's going to join us, and we're going to talk about a feed trial that Mandolin Royal has going on. That will probably air in a couple of weeks. So I'm pretty sure that you're not going to want to miss that one because it's going to have some good information in it.
yeah, that one ought to be really good, Rip.
Yes.
So
we're looking forward to it.
I'm excited to share it with people too. So it's going to be good.
Yes. So with that said, folks, thanks for joining us and taking an hour or so out of your evening every other Thursday. We really appreciate it. We hope we have been able to provide information that you find helpful and useful, and maybe get a little entertainment value thrown in from time to time. But until next time, y'all have a good evening, a good 2 weeks, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.